Welcome to the Heavy Spoilers Show. I'm your host Paul, and in this video we're breaking down the finale of Loki Season 2. Episode 6 is now out on Disney+, and we've got a big video to talk about all Easter eggs, hidden details, and comic book callbacks. We also now know how this sets up the future of the MCU, and a rough idea of where it could all be going for the upcoming films. I won't be covering the Marvel's ending in case you haven't seen it, but later on we might give some theories for Deadpool 3 and Avengers Secret Wars. That will be all at the end of the video though, and last week saw Loki getting the band back together to travel to the Loom in order to stop it from self-destructing. That takes us into this episode in which we get a lot of major revelations. For that final time, I'm gonna need you to hit the thumbs up button, and don't forget to subscribe because we have lots of comic content coming soon. But out of the way, huge thank you for clicking this. Now let's get into the Loki Season 2 finale.
Loki, how much do you know?
Let's assume I don't know much, but I'm a fast learner, and I'm a god.
Well, let's start at the beginning.
Now as always, we begin with the Marvel Studios logo, however here something's different. Rather than progressing forward like we normally do, we start at the end and then work backwards. This carries on in one continuous shot, with it taking us from where the Loom is and then working towards the control room. This point of the Loom is very much the goal in the entry, and it's where all things change out later in the episode. This opening shot reminds me a lot of the one from episode 5 where we had a journey through the TVA and then into the void. Just adds so much to the opening of this entry, and we see Loki time slip into place. Time keeps on slipping into the past, and this is a different angle to what we saw last week, as we never caught Victor going down the stairs. Thus I believe that scene was from his point of view, with him looking up and then seeing the god. Now the episode itself is titled Glorious Purpose, and we see Loki achieving this in the end. Loki gets himself a throne, and all in all becomes the man who would be king. This is mentioned by name later on in the episode, and shout out to Simon A. Berman for pointing out it's a reference to the 1975 Sean Connery film. The throne is something that he's wanted his entire life, and even in Dark World he said something foreshadowing this.
All this because Loki desires a throne.
It is my birthright.
The first episode of Season 1 was also called Glorious Purpose as well, very much completing this entire Ouroboros. Now things don't go too well in the opening, and we see his victors killed once more. We then get a fifth of Beethoven with a montage of the music constantly repeating over and over again. This music was used during Saturday Night Fever, and it's such a funky way to add to the montage aesthetic. This reminded me a lot of the ending of Doctor Strange, in which the Doc ended up using the Time Stone to loop his time with Dormammu. Loki becomes what he does at the end, which might even explain why the Time Stone's green, and as I've been saying, it's all connected.
Yeah.
Now realizing by the time that Victor goes to the bridge, it's gonna be too late. Loki then time slips back to the war room to grab Victor earlier. This allows him to see his minutes and get things in motion for earlier, but in the end, it's still not good enough. Love how he can also catch the skin written on the monitor, which Mobius of course wrote back in episode 1. Victor is killed again and again, and I don't really feel like this episode fully hammers home that Kang's a big threat. Maybe later on. Anyway, earlier in the season, we of course watched the death of Ms. Minutes.
You'll never be him.
In hindsight, I kinda wonder who she was talking about, because she could have been talking about Kang, but also Loki due to what we have happen at the end. Now so far the series has been operating on the bootstrap paradox, even down to it being elements of the show's plot itself. I've talked about that theory to death, so I won't bore you with it, but it basically involves a time loop in which there's not really a start or an end point. What happens is a scientist gets some information from the future that they then use to then help them navigate the course of the present. They then use time travel to send this information back to themselves so they can carry on the loop that leads to them sending the information back to them in the first place. It's something that Dark worked with a lot, with the recent series Bodies also dealing with a similar sort of plot device. Definitely recommend checking them both out, but the function of time travel switched from that for this finale. Here we operate with rules similar to the butterfly effect, in which one's able to travel back to certain points in their life. Time's obviously viewed in a linear manner by humans, but this theorizes that one's able to go back to certain points in their past. No longer viewing time in a linear fashion allows someone to go back to a certain point in their life with the knowledge that they then attained in the future. This is a similar thing to what Dr. Manhattan had in Watchmen, and also Amy Adams' character in Arrival. Now both still has this cause and effect feeling, as knowledge needs to be attained in the future to then go back and change the past. It's lots of timey-wimey wibbly-wobbly stuff, and there's actually the theory in quantum mechanics that the butterfly effect won't change anything and that time will heal itself anyway. That was something that was discussed in Days of Future Past, and in the end, He Who Remains may still come out on top, with this all being part of its own loop. At the channel, we always get companies trying to work with us. You know, we don't do that many brand deals, and that's purely because I just want to pick out products that I think you guys are going to love and really enjoy using. That's why, for this video, I've teamed up with Age of Sage, who have these fantastic, absolutely love them, these amazing Star Wars tumblers that you can get right now by clicking the link below. They're the perfect gift for a dad, boyfriend, husband, or just someone in your life that you love, and if they're a big fan of Star Wars or The Mandalorian, then you definitely need to pick one of these up. They've got a ton of different ones on the link below. You know, you've got that Mandalorian one, but you've also got The Last of Us one, Mario, Hocus Pocus ones, and Mr. and Mrs. ones that just complete the whole set. Whether you're a tea drinker, you love coffee like me, or you're a wine connoisseur, these are perfect and they'll keep your drinks either hot or cold for hours depending on your needs. They're also made with highly durable stainless steel. You know, they're not going to get any dents or breaks or even crack open, completely spill proof, and yeah, really good product that I highly recommend you pick up. It's also got a non-slippage bottom as well, so that's not going to spill over. But what will be tripping over is people looking by going, wow, love that design, because I think that's absolutely brilliant. So yeah, huge thank you to HSH for sponsoring this video. Can't recommend this product highly enough, and make sure you click the link in the description below if you've got someone out there who's a fan of, you know, Mario, Star Wars, The Mandalorian, Last of Us, Hocus Pocus, whatever you want. This is the perfect gift, and I guarantee anyone you buy this for, they're going to really appreciate it. Find Age of Sage on Amazon and click the link below for 20% off. Use the code 20galactic for 20% off and click the link below to go through to their Amazon store. This is the way. At this point, Loki goes back even earlier to when they first brought out the model of the loom. Obi is once again really embarrassed that Victor's seeing his work isn't amazing, and it's such a funny scene to watch. They kind of replay moments of that scene too, but this time the dialogue's really rushed.
Victor, this model is not finished, okay? There's only one coat of paint on this.
Now this model is actually an Easter egg that we missed in episode 4. There they said,
Here's a model I mocked up of the loom. We give it a shoddy and slapdash work. It's not to scale.
But we could see that it was actually probably better than this channel. Now, this was also a reference to Back to the Future when Doc Brown said,
Please excuse the crudity of this model. I didn't have time to build it to scale or to paint it.
I only got one coat of paint on there. I haven't been able to carve out figures to represent all of us.
That's good. Oh, thank you, thank you.
Okay, I think you're being a little hard on yourself, Obi. It looks great.
All right.
Even though the lines are the same, everyone's kind of confused about what's happening, and they can't enjoy it because they feel it's all kind of a rush. Makes me think it's like what happens when you want to just skip through life, but in the end you realise He Who Remains were the friends you made along the way. At this point, Loki realises he needs to learn everything that Obi knows, and though it's going to take centuries, he ends up committing to it. A huge shout out to you guys for last week pointing out the origins of Obi's real name, A.D. Doug, not the dog. Now Ryan Airy, on a related tangent, Ryan Airy pointed out this is likely a nod to Douglas Adams, who was the author of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. That explained 42 was the answer to everything, and Protocol 42 is what He Who Remains used to wipe out everyone's memories. However, this could potentially be Arthur Douglas, who in the comics was Moondragon's father. Though she was introduced in Guardians 3, this may have been a nod to where the High Evolutionary got the girl from. Arthur was also killed by Thanos, which may have happened to OB if he'd remained on the timeline. 80 is of course used in time as well, with us using it to date things in opposite to BC. His room looked exactly the same as the TVA, and he even used a taser on Loki in the same way that a pruning stick would be used by the TVA. Now from here we cut to centuries later and see Loki guiding Victor into the machine. Man's memory must be amazing, because I can't even remember what happened in last week's episode, but Loki remembers all the stuff he needs to. It's clear that he's also been through this a lot of times before, because he talks about where he needs to tape the suit. This includes one of the cracked parts of the faceplate, which Mobius also had to do in the season's first episode. Victor repeats the line "time to be brave," but again, this is kind of in fast forward. Loki's clearly learned a load too, and I love this bit.
Watch out, Obi. Looks like
Someone's coming for your job. That's right. I'm a coming. Obi, watch your back.
Just shows how much he's been through and is losing his patience, but doesn't want to clue anyone into what's really going on. Now Loki at this point instructs Victor to hit the button, but it just won't work. Kinda reminds me of what happens when I tell people to hit the thumbs up, but that doesn't happen either. Got like 300,000 views last time and 10,000 likes. What the bloody hell is that? Now we appreciate it, but this shows that Victor isn't the right person for the job, and though it works, the struggle here hints that it has to be someone else. Now, this foreshadowing of Loki taking over was even shown in the first shot where we had Loki running in front of the statue of Kang. His face then started to crumble, and that's sort of been a metaphor for what's been happening in the series. Now Victor fires it off and then manages to get back, which is when Victor says, "Pumpkins." This is actually 19th century slang, and it basically means to give yourself a pat on the back. However, unfortunately the loom still ends up exploding, which makes Loki realize that all those centuries were kind of for nothing. It needed to happen to get to what we get to, but yeah, just a kick in the teeth to see it happen again. Now the monitor sparks up and we see that the energy is also green, which in itself is of course one of Loki's colours. I kinda wonder if green's laced throughout the TVA for this reason, with even the key lime pie being that colour too. The branches then expand due to a scaling problem, and the loom can't accommodate an infinitely scaling multiverse. Once more the loom explodes and Loki ends up returning to the Citadel where he tries to change things. We get a sort of replay of the scene before the time slip takes him back, but he's able to change what he says. He then states,
The last thing I want is a throne. Sylvie, stop!
which we'll see about that. Now I love how He Who Remains is just kind of cackling in the back, and he constantly says see you soon, which was a taunt that he used in his dying breath. Now He Who Remains is still in his Immortus getup, which is the last known version of Kang. All Kangs eventually become Immortus, and the comics could hint to us exactly what happened. Immortus eventually brought all the council together and gave the idea that they were to stand as a united front. However, in the end, that was a f***ing lie, and he'd done all this to be able to take them all out at once. So him wearing this makes a lot of sense, and I think he's the real Immortus rather than the one in Quantumania. Now in the elevator, he also sees Loki put away his sword, which kinda tips him off that something here has changed. That's very much what we're seeing here, with the loop of Season 2 all being part of the plan. Just in the same way that Episode 1 had Ravona explaining the Avengers were always meant to change time, Loki was pretty much always meant to do this. Can we get some toast at a graphic of how the show worked, and what we have is Season 1 ending by creating this loop. The loop itself was always meant to happen, but its eventual outcome was always going to be that it ended with Loki going back to this point. From here things would then change and then be able to continue to what we have in the show. Now shout out to Josh at Den of Nerds, who predicted this was all going to be an illusion. This was because the flaw in the hologram made it look like it had a triangle, whereas in the real room it was a Necker square. A Necker square is an optical illusion, which confirmed everything this is. Now, the battle itself is a really big thing for the show, and I love all the action that we see happening. The sword throwing, magic, it's all spot on, and Season 2 sort of being a mirror of Season 1. We had Loki and both arriving at the TVA and not really understanding what was going on. They then team up with their variant, and bombings would happen, carried out by a nefarious head in Episode 2. Next, we'd go to a location before a character was pruned and sent into the void. Mobius was pruned in Episode 4, which was mirrored by Ravona in Episode 4 of Season 2. That would then end with a big cliffhanger with Episode 5, showing us that it was not as it seemed. Finally, Episode 6 would culminate at the Citadel, and the show's just been so well structured. When Loki asks He Who Remains why he doesn't fight back, he then realizes that he's been through this before and finally stops things in order to confront him. Just him kind of mocking him, with him also stating that he paved the road. This is something that he said in Season 1, and our survey says that it was him. Now, our survey says is a little joust that he puts out, and in the UK, that would be referencing the show Family Fortunes. I think in the US, it's called Family Feud, though, but you American peeps, come on, come help a guy out with his breakdown, let me know if that's wrong, and I'll be the British Loki guy, and you can be the American He Who Remains. Now, if you've been enjoying the videos for the past 6 weeks and want to help support the channel, then make sure you pick up our Loki-inspired t-shirt on our merch store below. This contains all our latest designs like our classic movie breakdown one as well, and it's the best way to support heavy spoilers. We also have the join button as well, which is basically our Patreon that will get you access to some of our videos before anyone else. Also, I've been told to tell people to stop going to Ace Cafe and using the code ACESpoilers to get 50% off. It was a joke, mate. It was just a joke. Don't go to Ace Cafe and say, Ace Spoilers, I want 50% off, because you're not going to get it. Now, He Who Remains also talks about reincarnation, baby, which is the same line he had in the Season 1 finale. He's really the devil, and it's with this that Loki steps up to the plate and reveals it isn't the first time that he's been through this. Stopping time, he shows that he's mastered it, with He Who Remains warping Sylvie out of there. He Who Remains sees all and mocks Victor's stutter and talks about the failsafe of the loom. We discover how the loom actually works, with it just deleting the branches that aren't supposed to be there except for the sacred timeline. I feel like He Who Remains has already encountered Loki before and that he's seen him kill countless of his variants.
My variants are already out there.
I won't stop.
Doesn't matter.
Never stopped me before.
I know, champ.
I feel like what we might get in the end is that Loki will either go toe-to-toe with him, either in Kang Dynasty or potentially during the events of Secret Wars. Either way, the outcome of the equation remains the same.
But the outcome to this equation remains the same.
I love how he repeats the word remains as well, with us letting us know why he always wins. At this point, Loki sees the equation on the wall, and he says that he's gonna break things. However, Loki doesn't seem willing to make the tough choice, as doing this will ruin all his happy moments and destroy his friends too. Not even the sacred timeline will be safe, but Loki promises to find another way. At this point, He Who Remains brings Sylvie back, which gives Loki the option to make the hard choice. Now from this point, we go back to episode 1 of season 1, and we catch Loki in the Time Theatre. Him returning to this was actually foreshadowed last week, with him time sipping to here before he then moved on. These were all important locations throughout the characters' lives, with this also being a defining one for him. He promises to claim his throne again, tying back to that line from Thor the Dark World. Now on the desk, we can see a can of Josta Cola, which was an old cola brand that then went out of business. Obviously the TVA have access to all time, hence why Mobius is still able to sip it. Now this sort of turns into a therapy session, but obviously we're still with the season 1 Mobius. He's still indoctrinated and is just brooding because he thinks that's the right thing to do. Now Mobius then tells him the story of someone who was responsible for 5,000 deaths in the Black Sea. Going to prune him, he then discovered it was an 8-year-old boy, and it's very much a sort of would you kill Hitler as a baby if you could go back in time thing. The kid was just hanging out with his brother, and the hunter refused to make the tough choice, and thus things went awry. In the end, we learn Mobius was that guy, and I think the 2 boys made him stop because he has 2 sons. Though he's not conscious of it, something's clearly buried away, which explains why he also has a fascination with jet skis. Though his memory was erased, you can't change a person's nature, and it's such a telling thing for Mobius's character. Now his partner who did it, that's definitely Ravona, and we did see in the past how she brought a young Sylvie in. However, she too hesitated and let her go, and this butterfly effect very much brought about the events of the season. Her being a teacher, that may have been what stayed her hand, and again, you know, she had a relationship with children, so it does show it's buried in her subconscious. Realizing there's no comfort though, and that you choose your own burden, Loki then slips to the end of episode 5 where he starts to change a lot of things. He stops reality falling apart and takes Sylvie outside of time, and this is so the pair can have a very deep conversation. He tells her that the loom's designed to protect the sacred timeline and that she has to die so she can't kill He Who Remains in the first place. Sort of like the grandfather paradox, with Loki realizing that there's a hope that he can replace things with something better. Now the idea of Loki being in control was actually foreshadowed a lot throughout the season. Even back in the first century, we watched as Loki was trying to rationalize why He Who Remains was doing what he did.
You came to kill the devil. Maybe he was.
Calling him the devil, he also pointed out that he was sort of a better the devil you know leader. Though he stripped away free will, the other option was far, far worse. Kang's multiversal war would ravage across every reality and lead to trillions and trillions of lives being lost due to the amount of destroyed timelines there'd be. Loki's always been the perfect candidate to become Loki Who Remains, and him taking over the role was even something he argued for at the end of season 1. Sylvie ended up killing He Who Remains and kicking Loki back in time, but Loki's choice was always that obvious. On top of that, Earth 616 Stan pointed out on our last video how similar Loki was to Kang when dealing with Don. He promised to drop him back at his home the moment he left, so he could be with his kids again. This is similar to how Kang promised Janet he'd return her to home if she helped him out in fixing the multiversal chair thing. Both of them are kind of deals with the devils, and these Faustian offers of course never really played out the way that you'd expect. Janet would have had to allow Kang to wipe out countless timelines, and in the end, she wouldn't have even ended up with her hope. Now at this point, he warps back to the end of episode 4, and he decides to be the one that goes out on the walkway. Also, huge shout out to Simon again for pointing out that the saying on the wall for all time always, broken down to its acronym FATA, in Latin means destiny. Now, the reason that Loki can survive this radiation is purely because Loki is a god. Even things like Infinity War showed Thor could survive out in space, and due to their density and lifespan, it's very difficult to kill them, which we've seen with Loki's hundreds of times at this point. And this shows that it was always meant to be his destiny and explains why he's worthy, whereas He Who Remains isn't.
I was made for this.
Now this bridge itself also somewhat hints to Loki leading, as it even resembles elements of the Bifrost. The Bifrost is based on Asgardian designs, which this too also has itself. Loki himself had a transformative moment on a bridge in the first Thor, and now it's coming full circle to capitalize on that. Walking along, we see his clothes strip away, but he changes into this new kind of god suit. This was actually spoiled on the Season 2 poster, giving us a clue of where things were gonna go. This time the crown resembles the cracks of the citadel, with it being fused together through using kintsugi. This is an ancient Japanese technique of fusing cracked pottery together, and it could also show that he was a smashed statue at the citadel. We never learned who this was, but having Loki there, that would of course spoiled everything. Tearing the loom apart, this then spreads out the strand, which Loki starts to then pull together. These act like the roots of a tree, and from here Loki creates the World Tree. This all connects to Norse mythology, and tree imagery is being shown throughout the season. Even the mail vent that led into Obi's room, that sort of looked like a trunk heading up into one. Tearing up its doorway to the citadel at the end of time, Loki then decides to give everyone a chance. I feel like this is taking Loki to become the god of stories, and potentially even on the Avengers Prime arc. Agent of Asgard heavily influenced the show, as it was a major point for Loki in the comics in which he shifted from villain to hero. The source material had him as the god of stories, in which he ended up leaving the multiverse completely and going to a void outside of time and space. Here he encountered not only those who sit above in the shadows, but also an elderly King Loki who'd been throwing things through time to try and control his past. God of Stories ended up telling him that due to his actions, he'd actually changed things with him too, and had propelled him from being a stepping stone into becoming a new kind of Loki. This was a major change in the character that vastly altered him, and they are sort of riffing off that here. Last week also took a heavy focus on fiction, and fiction itself is of course based around stories. On top of this, we discover that Hunter B-15's name was Verity Willis, and that too was a character that popped up in the comics. Now, Avenger Prime is also someone who exists far, far out in the future, and he's also been controlling things in the past too. In case you don't know, Feige's now the one who's in creative control of the comics, and it's thought that he's slotting things into those to help set up things for the MCU. This includes Avenger Prime, who could become a major part in the upcoming stories like Kang Dynasty, and also Avengers Secret Wars. Their identity was teased for ages, and then it was revealed in the end that this was actually Loki. Unmasked in Avengers Forever 12, it was discovered that he dipped into the multiverse and had learned things of the Avengers, defeating him everywhere. Destroying them, this then created several major multiversal threats that the Avengers would have defeated in their own reality. Thus he had to collect the Avengers from other timelines, and this was in order to right the wrongs of the past. Now I know that's not really what's happening here, but the basis for it could be used in the future. Now from here we jump to the TVA after and see the tree poster that's been spoiling this entire ending every time we've seen it. This tree iconography is also shown in the mural of the Timekeepers, which the Timekeepers stood around and helped to grow. Life at the TVA, that's been turned on its side, which we also see in the branches too. Now Ms. Minutes is there, but they're trying to trust her, and they're keeping an eye on the He Who Remains variants. This includes one that they say is 616 adjacent, with us seeing shots from Quantumania. We're told that they handled it, and thus the TVA doesn't need to step in. Now, this confirms a theory that we had in our last video, which is that the majority of the show was taking place before Quantumania. Avengers Endgame was the moment in which Loki slipped out of the time stream, and after being caught by the TVA, he spent what's about 2 weeks going on the journey in the show. Thus, even stuff like No Way Home is technically happening after this series, with the multiverse opening up to allow the Council of Kangs to then be created. This is all ushered in the multiversal war, with that playing out in Secret Wars with Kang potentially at the center of it. I know there's rumblings that he might be replaced by Doctor Doom due to that Variety article, and hey, I think that could be the case too. In the comics, both Secret Wars events were centered around Doctor Doom, and he ended up stealing the power of the Beyonder, or Beyonders, depending on what version you read. This made him into a god, in which he was able to bend reality to his will. When the multiverse was destroyed, Doom ended up putting together salvaged pieces of it into one planet called Battleworld along with his ally Doctor Strange. He was there when the Beyonders were all destroyed, and there was even talk that had Doctor Strange stepped up that he could have been the ruler. Now I think that's where things could end up heading, but we'll talk about that more later on in the video. Now on his desk we see that Mobius has requested a file, and though they want to take the Timekeeper murals down, they remain who remains up. Mobius says those who don't remember the past, wow, And this is the beginning of the phrase, those who don't remember the past are doomed to repeat it. This is normally used to describe war and heinous acts carried out by humanity, with it often being used to describe the outcomes of fascism. The TVA once stood as a fascist organisation, but now they're trying to do better and remember the past. Either way, we learn that Mobius is leaving, which shows that Loki actually kept his promise in episode 5. Though he gets offered the chance to be a judge, he goes back, and hey, no, I'm not crying, you're crying. Now Mobius doesn't really know anything else, and thus he's scared, but he still decides to go back. We see the war room is now a buzzing hive of staff, with it showing that things are now more open than just having one ruler above all. The official TVA second edition is then released, with it being a golden yellowy colour instead of the orange one that was before. I was trying to think what this might represent, I couldn't quite figure it out, but if you know, then please drop it below. Now back with Victor, he never got the buck, and Ravona then wakes up down in the void. Over in the corner, she looks over at a pyramid and Sphinx, which could be hinting towards her teaming up with Ramatut. This was a Kang variant that was the pharaoh in Egypt, and we see the grass move out the way to reveal this is where the TVA once stood. I think that's how I interpreted it anyway, and it seemed to me that the Citadel was all that remained of it, and maybe it was pruned and sent to the void. It could show Ravona escapes though, and maybe eventually we'll see her destroy it. Either way, we see as Alioth arrives, and the creature's a big change up from how they're in the comics. The source material had him as an even bigger conqueror of time than Kang was, with his temporal domains stretching back billions of years. This was all the way up to 2000 BC, which was a temporal point that Kang refused to go past. This is because it would have brought him into conflict with Alioth, who up until that point ruled over it all. Though he's presented almost like a lapdog here, there may be more to the character, with him potentially even being banished to the void so Kang could conquer more time. Now I feel like Ravona may end up conquering Alioth, and she could use it as a way to get out. There's a determined look in her eyes as it gets closer, and I don't really think that looks like fear. Now Ravona in the comics was a big love interest of Kang, with her playing a major part in developing the character. That's something we've seen in the series with the info that we've got, and she also sort of follows her later iterations. It actually got to a point where Ravona ended up turning against him because of all the pain and misery that he wrought across the multiverse. And only myself left to conquer. He loved her when he was a young Nathaniel, but she was then killed by an older version of Kang. This then sent her essence out into the time stream where she was reincarnated again and again through time. No matter what happened though, their love was doomed, and the pair were always unable to actually be together. Sometimes she'd be killed, and other times she'd betray him, leading to Kang becoming depressed and bitter. In the end, he encountered his younger self and murdered her past versions to start the cycle again. Here we've seen Ravona go from a loyal and devoted soldier who helped to win He Who Remains his Time War but then got betrayed. Since then, she's been running the TVA, but it's been a thankless role, with her being cast out of the kingdom of heaven so He Who Remains can rule alone. In many ways, she could even be a flip on Lucifer, and there's definitely lots of biblical imagery laced throughout the show. Season 1 saw He Who Remains carrying an apple, and Loki and Sylvie were like Adam and Eve. Now we watch as Mobius goes back to his old home, which is where he's then joined by Sylvie. They're seeing the perfection in imperfection, and this brings things full circle from what she said to him in episode 4. She said if he never looked, he'd never know, but now he's ready to stay and watch over his life. Super sad, like super happy as well, and I'd be lying if I said there wasn't some dust in the room making my eyes go funny. Now as for Sylvie, we don't know where she's gonna go, but we cut to Loki at the end of time on his throne holding it all together. A tear passes because of what he ended up giving up, but now my man has a very glorious purpose. Unfortunately, there's no mid-credit scene and no Season 3 confirmation, but I think we will definitely be seeing these characters again. Now before we get into what's my predictions, I want to talk what I've thought about this series as a whole. I know viewership's been down nearly 40% since that first season premiere, but I genuinely think this is the best MCU series out there. I've always been fascinated with time travel, and I think that this has mastered so many concepts and used its storytelling beautifully to weave them into its narrative. The bootstrap paradox has been used brilliantly without, and even though this sometimes makes stuff predictable, there's been so many curveballs thrown it's been difficult not to marvel at it. Pun intended. There's also just a step up in production that's happened with this series. I really noticed this watching season 1 and then going into this, but the way the camera moves is a major step up. Just adds so much dynamism to the scenes, and I actually think this helps with the panic that you can see a lot of characters going through. Plus the acting is top notch, and it's a really well crafted time story that I think makes the most of its central cast of characters. Though the locations and characters, they are a bit limited, It's woven together really well, and at points even feels like it's part of a stage play. This reminds me of a really well-crafted Doctor Who story stretched out for 6 episodes, and yeah, one of my favourite series so far in the MCU, obviously, but I really enjoyed it. Now, as for where the MCU goes from here, we have the multiverse saga coming into full effect with a number of upcoming titles. Again, I won't spoil the Marvels in case you haven't seen it, but if you have, MT has a big video breaking down what happened in that on the channel right now. You can click it at the end of the video though. Either way, the next major project we know we'll be tackling is Deadpool 3. This will take a heavy focus on the Fox franchise, and it will be bringing back a number of actors, including Hugh Jackman's Wolverine. From what I've heard, he's going to play a major part in Secret Wars 2, and that's going to have a number of returning actors in it as well. That'll be Tobey Maguire, the major X-Men cast, Robert Downey Jr., and potentially even Chris Evans. Avengers Endgame was a big celebration of the MCU, and Secret Wars is sort of going to be doing a celebration of all the Marvel movies from across the board. This includes the things that Marvel Studios didn't even own, but Disney's been doing the big moves and buying up all the studios that own these classic characters. So finally, they can bring them in for that big movie, and I know there's a lot of MCU fatigue at the moment, but I think everyone's probably going to be seated to see that. From there, it's been said that there'll sort of be a reboot that then creates a new universe out of all these older franchises into one streamlined timeline. That was what happened in the comics too, with characters like Miles Morales being brought into the 616. I think that we could even see a sort of Avengers Prime happening with Loki, in which he goes around recruiting the Avengers from across the timelines. Man can time slip at will, so we could see him going throughout all the realities to get who he wants to help fight in this multiversal war. Ultimately, I think that He Who Remains will likely come out on top, and then we might start to see the cycle begin again. However, this whole series has been about breaking cycles, and this has been seen right across the board. Loki originally was a villain that was used as a stepping stone to propel others to greatness, but he's even broken this along with the cycles that we've seen throughout the series. Such a good way to take things thematically, and I hope you've enjoyed us going through the series. Really means a lot to me that you watch us, because there's so many great channels out there making brilliant breakdowns. Massive shoutouts to Screen Crush, Hacks Dogma, Den of Nerds, New Rock Stars, Emergency Awesome, Mo from Streamer, Real Rejects, Canadian Lad, Everything Always, Cosmic Wonder, and basically all the people who've made talking about this show so fun. Also, huge shoutouts to MT who joined our team back in August. Man's really brought an incredible amount to the channel, and I think his analysis level, it's completely next level. Anyway, huge thank you to him, and huge thank you to you guys again for everything, and please drop a like on the video as it really helps us out. I'd love to hear your thoughts, of course, and if you want something else to watch, we've got a video on screen right now. That's going to be going over all the stuff that happens in the Marvels, so hopefully I'll see you over there right after this. By the way, huge thank you for sticking through the video. I've been Paul, I'll see you next time. You take care, peace.